Um, right. So I think the GDPR will continue to give us a lot of food for thought and discussion over the coming years. And it's still a relatively new legislation, even though a lot of its bases have been existing in Europe for the past 25 years, as a lot of the law builds on what was previously the Data Protection Directive in Europe. Um, so first, something that is obvious for a lot of European, but the differences between those two rights is maybe not for others, is that the GDPR actually does not protect the right to privacy, but it protects a different fundamental right in Europe, which is the one to data protection. And we have a separate framework that Alana mentioned for privacy, which is the e-privacy directive that is currently being reformed. And so one part of the challenges, I guess, is to first understand the interplay between those two rights and how they are complementary and how they both need to be protected, but how privacy is about protecting really what is your personal sphere, and personal data is a positive right in a sense that helps protecting privacy, help enabling other rights, also helps protecting against discrimination, et cetera, et cetera. But legislation to protect data protection are not there just to create stringent requirement on companies. They're here to reinforce people's rights, and they're also here to set the basis of how data can be used in a responsible manner. So I think one of the main issue we had with when we start discussing data protection is a lot of time it's framed as a barrier to trade and something that is burdensome and complicated and really seen as a sort of a compliance bureaucratic type of domain, instead of an enabler of different type of innovation that could happen with a more data responsible economy, a more a tech perspective that would put human at the center of innovation. And a lot of companies are moving toward this direction, and a lot of making the effort for that. But the reality is that if only a small portion of companies are making the effort to comply with the GDPR, it's true that those might be find themselves in a differable competitive situation compared to company that would sort of continue a business as usual of data harvesting and no protection for users and monetizing this information and profiting from it, which with all of the social and externalities that we know. So the biggest challenge I think we have right now with the GDPR in Europe, but potentially as a lesson learned also from others who are doing their own data protection laws or privacy laws around the world, is that so far this law has been a huge legislative success, but it's been an enforcement failure. And even though we had like initially the first big fine and the first cases being resolved relatively quickly, we're now approaching almost the 3 years of the application of this law, and we're still waiting for massive enforcement to happen from, for instance, two of the main regulators in charge of implementing it in Ireland and Luxembourg, which is where most of the tech giants are being headquartered. And if we don't have those sanctions coming up, and I'm not just talking about monetary fine, because the goal of this legislation is not to just throw fine left, right, and center, but if we don't have this enforcement coming and strong sanction that also ask company of, here you've collected data that you should never have in the first place, you have to remove this information, or here using a profiling technique that is actually pervasive and too invasive, you need to modify it. So really making the change of business model in a way that protects better people, then we'll stay in this sort of scenario where we are right now, where a lot of companies are expecting of like, should I invest in modifying my business model to do that? Should I make some of the changes? I'm also not really certain what change should I be making. So there is a lot of help that needs to be made in making sure everyone is compliant towards it, and basically putting a lot of the political will in making the GDPR in reality, as much political will has been put in making it a legislative reality. And so we're pushing a lot for this enforcement to come, not as a punishment towards company, but as making it a reality, and making it that, okay, if we spend so many years trying to move for this development, and if we see how data abuse are creating issue in our society in many aspects, even beyond the protection to the right to privacy, we really need to put the focus there. So I think you will be, what is interesting is at the moment, the biggest proponent of GDPR at the time, which include us, sometimes also become its biggest critics because of this expectation of, okay, we have the energy and we want to make it true. And I think this is where we can link it a little bit to also the reality of the right to privacy, sadly. It was mentioned by manipulated, that the right to privacy at UN was really consecrated in 2013 with the resolution on the right to privacy, when we had massive scandal of how it was being abused. And it's a little bit an unfortunate reality that, this consciousness and these changes around the rights in the digital era are happening only after massive violation happens, while we could have a proactive approach and have those discussions on how to create business model, but also use of data and use of privacy technique from government to private sector, that from the get-go have privacy data protection and security embedded by design, and develop that. And there's a lot of innovation to do in this area. So I think there is a narrative discussion on having of stopping talking about barrier and block to innovation, because other innovation is also possible, but it's also putting the energy to make it happen. And that we're not yet seeing that change. But I think the discussions we're having today and hearing from many others on what everyone is doing is encouraging, because this is where we collectively need to go. This is where we all collectively agree that, we're not saying don't use data, don't develop tech, don't do those things. It's consider the externalities of what you're doing, consider what data you really need for this, and consider how innovation can really truly serve people, and how you can maintain people being in control of this. And this is where you're going to go. There was a discussion about the trust, the confidence that people will have in it. And I really appreciate the comments that were made by the Conseiller d'État, that you can't force the trust on people. You need to earn it, and you need to demonstrate it. You can't just be like, please trust me, I've done this, use that. And I think we've all sadly learned of that through the COVID-19 crisis, when you have government developing apps very quickly and having to partner with tech giants to do them, because of the reality of, if you need an app, you need to deliver it through the phone. So you have to work with Apple and Google. If not, the apps doesn't reach people. But if you don't think within your infrastructure of, will people trust it? And if you just have a message of, this is fine, please trust it, WhatsApp is worse or whatever, this is not how you earn the trust of people. You need to rebuild the conversation, and also shows that innovation can be done differently and can be done in a way that truly integrate privacy and people's right, and give them the actual control. So the trust will come from them, but you have to demonstrate that you're trustworthy, basically. You cannot expect from us to trust all of you, and that will somehow magically happen. So I think the GDPR gave us a lot of the tools to help happen, to help having this trust happening and those changes happening, but we need to collectively put the political will to make that happen.